Good morning, folks. So this is just a quick little rundown of some of the things that I've been working on. Just wanted to try to give a status and try to, you know, give an idea of the things that I've been thinking about. So one of the things that I've noticed is that so a little bit about me. I like projection mapping. That's actually how I kind of got into all of this. I've always been interested in digital animation, digital art, multimedia, all those kinds of things. And it's been quite a few years, probably 20 years, 20 plus years of all this kind of interest in how all this works. But one of the things that I've always noticed is that with projection mapping, there is a sort of a fee for entry, if you catch my drift. There are many different programs out there that you can do all kinds of great and wonderful things, and I do own quite a few of them. Heavy M is a very great product for doing projection mapping. Resolume is a fantastic product that allows you to do all kinds of crazy things, especially if you're a Photoshop person. Probably Resolume is the one that will speak to your heart, and will work the best for you. So I would suggest that one. There are, even Heavy M has its place, but to try to narrow this down, the thing that I've noticed is that I have all these people who are interested in what it is that I do, and then when I try to say, well, you could do this, however, it requires this program and that program, and you have to do this and you have to do that, and so the fee for entry, if you will, the things that take, the wind out of the sails, if you will, is that without the software, without the programs, it's not audio reactive. It loses some of its uniqueness. So one of the things that I've been thinking about is, okay, how do we make it, first of all, a little easier to get into doing projection mapping? How could we make it so that people who maybe don't have the software but want to try it, or want to try doing projection mapping, how could they make that work? So one of the things that I've played around with multiple times is this idea of using Blender to do projection mapping, a real-time rendering through Eevee, and then projecting that onto your surface, whatever you're using as your projection mapping. In my particular case, I use the cubes and the squares and the hexagons and all the things that I've created through doing papercraft, right? So for me, like, that is one of the things that I've been thinking about was, okay, could I use Blender to do that? I've used it in certain instances for lighting, and that is one of the reasons why I like using Blender, is because it's a three-dimensional program, and so all those things that you do in Blender still apply. The disadvantage is when you're using Blender in this way, you run into issues with resource. Resources are a big issue. So if you have other programs that you're running besides Blender, that may be an issue. So for instance, I use Resolume, Heavy M, Synesthesia, all these other programs that are running behind the scenes. But you don't necessarily have to do all those other programs. You could do everything within Blender, because Blender is a shader rendering engine, right? Or Eevee is. So one of the things that I've been thinking about is, okay, how could I do this? Well, one of the things that I'm interested in is, like, I could use edges within geometry nodes. So I created this little patch here, or this little node set, that basically takes the edges, converts it to a mesh, separates the geometry, short version. Through these different steps, I'm able to basically shade just the edge detection, or the edge that I've created, right? So I've selected the edge, or the edge of the circle, right? Or the ellipse, whatever you want to call it. And then what I've done is I've basically given it a fill curve and then set a material to it. So in Blender, you can actually create your own shading. So if I click on here and I go to the shader editor, right at this moment, I'm just using a principled BSDF, nothing crazy. In this particular case, I just went down to the emission, and technically what you could do is just type in emission. If you really wanted to get it down to like brass tacks, you could just do just the emission node and then connect it to the surface, and it would achieve the same thing as this. That's the short of it, okay? And what I've done is I've just basically created just a red one and a blue one, but at any time you could change the color, right? And you just basically choose whatever color you want. You'll notice that there's some skipping going around when you're moving too fast. However, that's because I'm actually doing a render here of this little animation playing in the background, and this is actually its own shader as well. So if I go to material, you'll notice here is this emission. This is running this set of nodes to basically make this animated. And short version of that is I have this time value here that is set. You do hashtag frame within Blender, and when you do hashtag frame, that's a driver, and it's basically saying every frame of the animation. I have the timeline running. You'll see at the bottom it says animate player. So you hit the space bar and it'll just basically, that value will keep on moving until it gets to the end of the frame or to the end of the animation, and it'll go back to 0 and it'll just keep repeating, right? And so that's the reason why you see it skip every now and then. It's because it's getting to the end. There are ways that you can fix that so that it will bounce back and forth so you don't see that transition. There are other ways that you could make this a little bit more so you don't see that skip, right? So you could have it repeat and keep on going. There are ways to do that, but in this, for the time constraints of this animation or this video, I just wanted to kind of give a quick little thing of what you could do, right? So then what I've done is I've divided that by 500, and the reason why is because if I don't, it goes really, really fast. So it goes crazy if I just set it to 1. So I divide that by 500, and that makes it slower. I'm using a noise texture with a 4D, and the reason why I'm using the 4D is so that it gives me the W. The W is like it's like to make it animated, basically. If I took this off, I have this setting here, and basically it's a static of the W, and I can scrub through it and give it a specific time where I want to stop it, right? But if you add it to the vector that is running the value, it's just going to play the same subset over and over and over. And in a second, it should catch up. In a second. Any moment. Let's go back. There we go. Okay. So then that noise texture is going, the factor is going into a color ramp, and then the color ramp is going into the base cover, or the base color of the BSDF, and that's going into the material output. And so that creates this look. Okay. So then what I'm doing is I have these 3 different shaders in here. And what I've done is I've gone into my geometry node editor, and I've told it at the end here, use the material for the solid, which is this F curve. That's the middle here, okay? And then use for the edges, use this material, the red, right? And so what's happening is, and then I'm joining the 2 together. So I'm basically separating the solid middle from the outer red edge rim, right? And then that's going into the geometry output, which is showing this. And so this is just basically a way that I could control both sets. The reason why I would use Blender is because Blender, there's more to it. So one of the great things about Blender is it would allow me to do, just the world would become my oyster. It's just the ingenuity of, okay, how do I make all of this work? And just taking that to its nth degree, right? So you have to like, so this was just a test to see if it was even possible. But basically, in most of your projection mapping, they usually have a separation between the edge, the outer edge of your shape, and the middle edge, the middle of your shape, the solid of your shape, right? And so those are very indicative of something that's like a vector graphic. And technically this is kind of a vector graphic. It's a very granted that Blender is not just vector graphics, it's the entire shebang, right? It's all 3D. But there's nothing that says you couldn't use it this way, right? So, with all that being said and all that craziness, there are some nice things about this. Let's talk about the good. The good is you could go back into your shader editor, right? And I have that blue material and I also have that red material. I changed that red to the blue. I'll change it back to red, right? And so now I have this ability to change things fairly quickly. I could probably create a list or a window of all the modifications that I want. My plan is to make this. This is just a study in if this was possible, right? This is just a test run. But my idea is that eventually I want all these different settings on the right-hand side, and then also to have what do they call them? Assets, right? And so the idea is then you're using the asset browser. You set up your scene, your three-dimensional models, your projection mapping with all of the edges, right? So then you would go into your model, you would edit your nodes. They're not showing right now because I had the other things that you don't typically see. I turned those off. And what you can do is you could then select something, G, and then just move it, right? You could move it any direction you want, and it's in real time, right? So that's pretty nifty. So then you could, because you have the ability to move and maneuver your nodes, you could take this window, and the new version of Blender, you can actually create a new window much easier. However, in 4.2, you can do it as well. You can just hit new window, and here it is. Here's your second window, right? And then you just basically turn it on. You set your camera up, and then you remove all of your extras, right? And so then this is what your camera would see. And you would just project this onto your shapes. And when you set, that was the other thing I gotta talk about. But basically, you see, this is what would basically be on your wall or on wherever your shapes are going to be, right? So technically, you could create projection mapping within Blender. It is very possible. There are a couple things that you would have to turn off, and there are certain things that I've left on. For example, I'm going to close this window out. One of the things that I had to do to make this bloom, because 4.2 or the newer versions of Blender, they took the bloom away from the Eevee engine and they put it into the compositor. So if you go to your compositor, right here, you'll notice that right now I just have a small glare that's been set up. I have my composite and my viewer. And then I connect those to the glare and the render layers. Now, the disadvantage to this is probably the thing that's slowing down my engine right now. You'll notice at certain times where I was moving certain things, and this animation in the middle, the shader animation, would kind of stutter. And the reason being is because the glare takes a lot of processing. So I've brought it down to size 3. I could probably bring it down to size 2 and it would be fine. Although I kind of like that spill, that bloom spill. But the larger this size is, the more processing power it takes, right? So if you bring this down to 3, it still kind of achieves that effect without going too crazy on taxing the system. And the reason being is because this is basically the compositor that's compositing this out, and then I'm telling it to always be showing in the rendering in the window. The disadvantage to this is then it's like a feedback loop, right? So it's doing the bloom, and then it's also doing all the rendering and the shader. So all of that together is just so much for the system. It's not necessarily bad. However, you just need to make sure you have enough room for that. So that is the skinny of it. So one of the things that I'm also thinking about is, okay, so now I've got this all created, right? Here is the geometry node, which is, we'll go back to that geometry node editor. This is that geometry, right? And what I've done is I've created within that geometry node this right here, this width. And what this does is it allows me to increase the size of the edge, right? And so then technically what I could do is use a program called add-roots, which is add config, right? So then I could set up a MIDI controller or an OSC controller to control that edge, right? And I would do that by right-clicking and then saying create real-time root. And what that does is when you create it, I'll do that right now. Right-click, create a real-time root. We'll minimize this one and we'll go to MIDI controller, roots. So if we go to roots and then we go project roots, here's that root I just created. And then I would set it up with my MIDI controller and I'd be able to basically move one of my sliders, which would control this here. Or if you have the inclination, there's a program called Chataign or Chataign. You can look it up, just Chataign. Chataign has the ability to take your audio activity from your microphone and translate it to a MIDI controller. And then what you could do, or an OSC controller, right? And what you could do is you could use that OSC to control this. So it's moving, it's the audio reactivity. It's creating a beat, or it's changing the width of the outline based on the beat itself, right? You could technically set that up. There is a way to make that happen. So audio reactivity within Blender, it's very possible. At 60 frames a second, you can see here it's at 60 frames a second. Every time it skips back, it shows a lower number, but that's because it's going back to the beginning. It's how it's. I don't think this is really indicative of what you see. Whoops. I have to hold shift in order to do that. But so long story short, there is sort of an entry fee here, which is more about learning. Okay, and whether or not your computer can process it. However, this means that there is an ability to create projection mapping within Blender. And that is amazing because that also comes with Blender's ability to use three-dimensional models and lighting within your three-dimensional models. So technically, you could create a 3D model of what's out in the real world and then light it within Blender. And that's pretty amazing. I've done some other projects, and that is actually coming up with that very thing in mind. In the next couple days, I'm going to set up an example of this. This was just a test run and just kind of my findings. But my plan is to make an example of this and then bring this out to the world, show other people how it's possible, how you can make projection mapping, because I think it's an amazing technique, and I think that people would be very interested in it if it weren't for the fact that they can't do it because they don't have the software. So that's my plan. My plan is to make a tutorial set to show people how to do this. Eventually, I think I'm going to try to find a way to make donations for this and do all kinds of different things. Maybe make it so that the assets themselves, like I'll sell them maybe. I'm trying to figure out how I can make this, like I'm not looking to make like a whole bunch of money from this, but at the same point, like I'm trying to figure out if there's a way that I can do these things. Like I want to be an artist. My plan, and I'm going to be up in front with you guys, my plan is that I want to be a self-funded artist. I want to be able to do these things for a living. I love this. This is the thing that makes me happy. This is the thing that I get up every morning to do. I love art more than anything else in the world. And so my plan for you, or my expression to you, is that I want to be your person for assets, for tutorials, for all of that. If you guys have any ideas of any other ways that I can make this happen, let me know. I'm interested. But tell me what you think of this. Please give me, give me your input. I really am interested in what you guys have to say about this. Is this something that you think that you'd be interested in? Would you like to know about certain things about how this works? Let me know in the comments below. I appreciate your time. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you guys next time.